All right, here we are. Give it a second. Wait for everybody to come in here. Okay, let's get started here. All right, so um, today we are going to be covering William Butler Yeats and war poetry. So let's see, and the second coming. Hey, everybody. Okay, TGF. What's up, brother? What's going on? ADH. Shout out to our queen. How you doing? Jesky, homeboy, what's up? Yeah, sorry guys, big problems. I set it up and it just kept buffering, wouldn't go live. So we're gonna try doing this through. I'm on Streamyard now, so here we go. It worked, right? Okay, so thank you all for coming back. Appreciate it. Sorry I made you wait. I know how annoying that is. So it's 5 o'clock on a Friday. Let's get started, y'all. Thank you so much again. Yeah, I put some links. Okay, if you're watching this, I put some links in the description of the other video. I didn't have time to get them in this one. I couldn't. I just wanted to go ahead and go live and get it switched over. Let me see if I can drop a link real quick. Let's see. Okay, there you go. Hopefully that'll work. I don't know what it looks like for you guys, but I just dropped the link for Cash App, and then the PayPal. I added a PayPal link. That's in the main channel description, and I don't think it'll be in the description of the video. I'll add it later. But yeah, I put up a PayPal link. So if you guys want to support, I really, of course, really appreciate it. And yeah, it's crunch time. It's getting crunch time. We're in the dark days of February. So let's take a break from all of the stuff going on with certain countries and you know what, in certain events, sort of take a break because today we're going to be doing something a little different. Before, right, we were covering Renaissance poems, Renaissance poetry, and then we covered Milton, right? So, what's up, Natesky? Shouts out to Natesky. And shouts out to ADH again, a devotional heart. If you're watching this later, please go subscribe to our friend A Devotional Heart at YouTube, and also to our friend Jerry at Exposing Powerful Lies live streams. Everybody should be already subbed if you're watching this later to jaysanalysis.com, Jay Dyer on YouTube, and our beautiful friend Tristana at Primal Edge Health, and also David Patrick Harry at Church of the Eternal Logos. All of our friends, and we're all in this, big house together. So, yeah, thank you, and we're big fans of all those people. So appreciate it. Today we're going to be covering something a little different. We're doing a modern poem. I thought it would be a little bit shorter, but we're going to be doing William Butler Yeats's The Second Coming. And I thought we would do this because it's everything that we've been reading is relevant, but this is increasingly relevant, especially with the world events, things, the big event going on in a certain part of the world right now. All this is the language of this poem is pretty relevant, and also this poem has been discussed in passing and specifically in some of the recent analyses of some of the film and some of the globalist book series that Jay does. But this poem has come up a bunch of times just in the past year or two, and also really recently. So I thought we would just cover it to talk about it in full because it deserves some coverage and some analysis. Again, I'm not going to be doing a really deep well, we will be doing I guess, a deep analysis of this poem, but I don't want to do a cursory reading of the poem. We're not here to just like read the poem. We want to talk about the language like it deserves to be talked about, and to make some of the connections in it to the world right now, and to the 20th century, to global events as they've occurred, and to I guess, determine a sort of worldview. Both, we can try and talk about our own worldview, and we can talk about the worldview of, so we say Jeff. It's my icon in the corner. And Yeah, I've got a little different background right here. I'm not going to say what I'm doing, but this is slightly different. This is just, we'll call it another library. So so yeah, we want to talk about some of the ideas about the Celtic twilight language, Gnostic language, and some of the occult symbolism that occurs. Oh yeah, Amadeus is back there. Some of the occult images that occur in the poem, because this poem is written by William Butler Yeats. Now, William Butler Yeats, I'm not going to give like a biography like we're in school. I'll just say a couple of things that are relevant to this. Yeats is an Irish poet. He's an Irish poet, but he was an Anglican, even though he was a nationalist, and was played a major role in the 1916 in Ireland, when it then became the Republic of Ireland. He served in the Irish Senate. Crispy, where are you? Am I right about that? And he lived from 1865 to 1939. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he's one of the towering figures of 20th century literature, especially 20th century poetry. Yeah, shout out to TGF. You were near Ben Bulben, under Ben Bulben, right, where Yeats is buried. And of course, Yeats's famous epitaph, right, horsemen pass by. Yeats is an interesting character, really interesting. He reminds me of a couple of people. He reminds me a lot of Poe. I know that seems like a weird comparison, but he reminds me of Poe in some of the elements of his personal life. That their lives didn't overlap at all, neither geographically nor in terms of time. Poe lived 1809 to 1849, I think. And then, of course, Yeats is born in 1865. But Yeats's life did overlap with Ezra Pound. And that's pretty significant, because Ezra Pound is an American poet, and then William Butler Yeats kind of represent, to me, in my opinion, okay, people, in my opinion, represent a sort of a divergence in terms of modern poetry and modern literature. Pound was obviously highly influenced by both the ancient poets and mainly by Roman poets, Anglo-Saxon, ancient, not ancient, but the Anglo-Saxon era, right? So we're talking, Anglo-Saxon, Old English. So we're talking, first millennium AD up until, I don't know, 1200. He was highly influenced by them. He was influenced by the poets from Provence in France. And later, people may know that he went on to live in Italy. Yeats, on the other hand, is different from Pound, because he spent most of his time in the British Isles, and obviously mainly in Ireland. He was a proponent of the English language, even though he was a nationalist Irishman. He's on the currency now, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of cool to have a poet on your money. That's an interest, but that's very Irish, right? And he's a lot like Yeats, because they both had a strange love life. Yeats reminds me of Poe. I'm going back a little bit here. Yeats reminds me of Poe because they both had a strange love life. Poe, as we know, was rejected and then dejected as a result of it. And he married a series of women. I'm not going to go into the description of his particular love life and marriage. But let's just say that seems to have affected his writing. And the same goes for Yeats. Yeats was in love with Maud Gunn, who was a nationalist Irish woman, and a kind of an infamous figure in the history of Ireland. he was rejected by her a number of times and went off to as far as I know, I mean, I don't know. I think we can. I've read a few biographies of Yeats, and he seems to have had a pretty deviant or sort of degenerate side to him, and but we'll skip past that because we're just going to talk about the literature, not because I don't mind talking about it. I just think that I'm sure he was a weirdo. I'm sure he was a I'm sure he had his whatever. But we're going to just talk about the poems, and I was only bringing that up because Yeats's character. The one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, as far as Yeats goes, is the fact that he was a member, as we all know right here live. Yeats was a member of the occult society, the Golden Dawn, and while he was at Cambridge, and that is really interesting and relevant for this poem. Yeats even had beef with Aleister Crowley. They were both members at the same time. They had, I think, divergent views on their ideas of magic, although they were both creeps, and they had a sort of a magical battle. They were there when a bunch of famous and later infamous people were members. But Yeats's ideas about the occult, thank you, A.E. Waite. I was about to say A.E. Waite, the Rider-Waite Tarot Pack, and Yeats's ideas about the occult certainly grew up out of Celtic folklore, out of his Celtic upbringing. He was a big proponent of sort of an intellectual idea called the Celtic Twilight. He wrote a bunch of books on this. Earlier on, I mentioned, by the way, that was a pun when I mentioned the fact that something about did I say ivory tower earlier? Because Yeats and his idea of the tower is Celtic symbolism, sort of packed with occult meaning. And okay, so enough rambling. Thanks for you guys. Appreciate you listening to my fast talk and rambling, where I seem to have like a bunch of disparate ideas. I'm trying to draw a through line or a theme as I go through this live. So thank you for putting up with me for that. So let's just talk about the Second Coming. I guess I'll start with it's a short poem. So I'll just start with reading the poem. This is a short lyric 20th century poem where it's not quite free verse, but it doesn't rhyme. And that is another that's sort of where this is sort of where Yeats and Ezra Pound sort of went in the same direction. I mean, Pound believed in a strict rhythm and meter at times. Other times, like with his book Personae that he published, and with the magazine that he founded in Chicago in the early 20th century, he believed in total free verse, throw away everything, make it new, right? But Yeats usually, when we talk about poetry, we talk about form plus content equals meaning. The way poetry is meant to be experienced in two ways. It's meant to be read, or it's meant to be heard. It's to the ear, and it's also meant to be seen. It has to be, take meaning from the way that it looks on the page. That's important. And that's what we call the form. And the form of Yeats's poems, especially this one, the form is that we've got a pretty strict adherence to a rhythm and meter, which gives us the idea of traditionalism, or it gives us the idea of tradition and time. Time plays a big role in this poem. However, the form, we'll see it splits off from a free verse, from rhyme, splits off from rhyme, because he's trying to say we're going past something that is traditional now. Now we're going into something that is in the future. It's new. Actually, he'll say it's maybe in the present, and we'll see how many connections we can draw to our world now with this poem. Okay, so with all that being said, I'm just going to read the poem to you, and then we'll get started on it. It's called The Second Coming by Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands or the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. Okay, so that poem was written in 1919. This is just post World War I, published in 1920, 1921. That was a huge time, by the way, for all art, but especially for literature. You had T.S. Eliot and publishing The Wasteland around the same time, and then you had The Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald coming out. You had a huge movement in modern poetry, modern art, all at the same time. That's all happening at the same time. But this poem, we'll see, is really let's see, is really, Jared, good to see you. Thank you so much for showing up too, by the way, while you are at work. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it, homeboy. This poem, I think you can tell just from from a simple reading. You want a Colonel Kurtz impression of T.S. Eliot? We are the hollow men. We are the straw men. Headpiece filled with straw. Alas, the dried voices when we whisper together. Oh, man, he's really out there, man. Do you know what the man's saying? Do you know what the man's saying, man? You can't go into space. You can't go out into space, man, on fractions. It's either you either love somebody or you hate them, man. Oh, you mutt. Then he throws the book at him. There you go, Jeff. All right, so the second coming, a post-World War I poem that is still relevant more than ever. So let's start from the beginning. Obviously, when we talk about the second coming, our language is biblical right away, right? We're talking about revelation. In fact, we're not speculating here. We know that because he says the word revelation in the poem, right? Surely some revelation is at hand, line 9. Okay, we're talking about revelation. Notice, by the way, that he says some revelation. He doesn't mention revelation, but that we know what he's talking about here. In a way, I think he's diminishing the idea a little bit, and he's going in a different direction. So let's see how he does that. He begins by saying, turning and turning in the widening gyre. What is that? Well, the gyre, Gyre, the gyre is, we think of gyroscope, right? But a gyre is this idea. I would call it a Gnostic idea about eternal return, right? The idea of eternal return and eons in timeline. So imagine that you're thinking of, let's just say, I don't have Jay's whiteboard. Kristen, are you here? I'm just going to do this on a sticky note. Let's say that you imagine, just this very simple. Okay, I'm just doing very basic analysis of this. Imagine that this is your timeline. That's how we normally think of a timeline, right? How people normally think of a timeline, right? We think of this year happened, then this year happened, then this year happened, and we've got history, right? Except for when people bring up this idea of history repeating itself, right? History repeats itself. That's what people say all the time. And that is kind of what Yates is talking about here. This is his idea. This isn't mine. This is his idea. And what Yates is talking about here is that his idea of history or time is like a gyre, meaning that it's almost like a spinning top. I don't think it's quite deistic, right? As the spinning top, or the, in deism, it's like the clock, the idea of the clockmaker God, right? That they would say that God just sets the clock or sets the spinning top and then hands off. Okay, that's not quite Yates's idea, but his idea is more like this, which is that if you look at it from above, it's kind of a swirling mass, right? And it is in a spinning top, like a spinning top in a way, or more like an hourglass shape, in that history is this big funnel and then comes to a point of great tension and then begins again to spiral outwards. Now, that's a weird concept. It's a weird thing to think about, but it does make sense. And we're not just talking, kooky, mystical ideas, but it does make sense when you consider his other works, his literature, his worldview, and the sort of Gnostic influence that he had. And again, I don't mean to make the mistake of applying Yates's life to the literature that we're reading. The literature stands on its own. We can just talk about the poem on its own. I just think this is interesting. And if he says the word gyre, then we have to talk about what that means, right? And we do know, we can read this poem and see that Yates's idea is this idea of eternal return, right? That you've got life goes in these cycles, and then it comes back on itself, and then there's tension, and then it begins again. So let's see what he means by that. Well, let's look at the second line. He says, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. So we've got an animal image. These are going to recur in the poem. And what he's saying here is, first of all, there's a few things accomplished with the falcon image. We've got a bird of prey, right? We've got a bird of prey. We've got a person, because we've got the falcon and the falconer. We've got the beast controlled by the human, which may flip on its head later on in the poem. And we've got, where's the falcon and the falconer? Well, it's either Celtic, or it's, later on we're going to see this is probably a desert image, right? We've seen the videos, when beautiful Tristana shows the videos of the, what's the guy's name? Bin Khalid, forget his name, the vegan, the guy, right? And he's out with his family in the desert, and they're drinking camel's milk. Literally, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. They're drinking camels. That's their culture, drinking camel's milk, and they're falconing, right? They're hunting in a traditional method with falcons. So the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. I just heard this today in some commentary about the Eastern European event that's happening right now. Things fall apart. Such a simple statement. 3 words. Things fall apart. 4 syllables. Right? It's strong. It's a strong statement. It's quick. It's in your face. We're talking about turning motion. Then we have the falcon and falconer. Now we see things fall apart. Bam. That's the end of it. That's a statement. Same line. The center cannot hold. Okay, the center cannot hold. So now if we're looking at this gyre, I would say that it's more like, it's beginning to be shaped more like this, I suppose, right? With kind of these swirling mini eras. Yes? The center cannot hold. Things fall apart. It's going to go off into the next era. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Okay? So we've got political ideology and verbiage here. Look at line 5. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. Okay, so By the way, it's weird that it's loosed and not loosened or like let go. It's loosed. And that indicates that the center not holding to the speaker here, we'll call him the speaker, seems to be purposeful. Okay. In other words, Yates is, what do we call this guy? The demiurge? Or I'm sorry, Yates's idea would be, I guess, the, evil creator God, right? Is letting things go loose so they spiral out of control and create anarchy. And we get the blood-dimmed tide. Now, the blood-dimmed tide should make you think of a couple of biblical images, right? And I'm just talking basic level here. The blood-dimmed tide seems to be, number one, the idea of the flood, the tide, right? The deluge. We get the blood-dimmed tide because of Moses in Exodus. Right? We get Moses, Exodus, we get the plagues. We also get, what was the other one I was thinking of? Whenever we get water imagery like this, I tend to think of a baptismal image, which is going to occur later on in the poem. But here he's clearly talking about the blood-dimmed tide is loose. We get a river of blood, yes? And he says, and everywhere, here we go. This is where it gets dark. And everywhere, the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. Well, what's the ceremony of innocence? Baptism? So I think Yates's image here, he's showing us without telling us, is that his worldview is the speaker's worldview here. Let's stop calling him Yates. The speaker's worldview in this poem is one of, imagine the greatest thing you can think of, right? A ceremony, a ritual of life, right? Life, purity, right? And we get the baptism. And then invert that, and what do we have? We have this terrible image of the ceremony of innocence is drowned. Makes me think of, this is harsh, but makes me think of, in this world, in the poem, where we have evil run rampant, this is the priest holding the BABY, and the BABY is drowned in the baptismal font, right? What could be worse? What could be a more terrible image, or one that's emblematic for bloodshed and destruction? He says, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. How true is that now? I mean, that's the world we live in now. That's now. The best, or the people that, that society in general sees as the best, lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. The worst people make the most noise about the most ridiculous stuff. Yes? I mean, hello, this is the internet. Yeah? We see this every day. The best lack all conviction. They do nothing. They do nothing. The worst make all the most noise. They destroy, yes, and bring down. And I'm not applying that to any specific thing. I'm just saying this is an idea or an opinion that one could have about the current world, and which seems to just, this is a mirror. More on that in a second. Second stanza, he breaks the stanza. So we have two stanzas in this poem. And it's interesting because he finishes off that stanza, the shorter first stanza, by it's like a total break. Yes. And now we have something, whenever there's a stanza break like this, so look, I don't know if I can show you, but if you have, let's look at this poem right here. These are just a refresher here. These are stanzas, stanza, stanza, Remember, like a stanza is to poetry as basically a paragraph is to prose. And then here we have, this is called a stanza break. See, there's an empty line. Okay. And what that indicates is something has happened. There's what we call in poetry a volta. It's not really technically a volta because that's in a Italian sonnet, but this is a volta. It's a change. It's a shift. And he says, surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. Now, he says this because, first of all, remember in the last one we talked about the real estate of a line of verse. The real estate is expensive, right? If you're writing in lines, every word has to matter. Every word holds a significance. And when you repeat a word in a poem, what you're saying here is you're adding emphasis, extra emphasis to it. And he repeats the word surely, which is a kind of a common, seems to be a sort of a low word to use in terms of what he's saying here. But maybe that makes sense. Maybe it's low on purpose because the subject matter gets low. He says surely, which is also conversational. Surely this happens. Surely that happens. Surely some revelation is at hand. All right. So what is that? I think that means the speaker here is don't call me Shirley. My chair just broke as I said that. He says, yeah, give me all your money. Please drop some Cash Apps and some PayPals, y'all, so I can get a new chair. I got this garbage chair. I pulled it out of a dumpster from my office. All right. So I think what he's saying here, the speaker is saying, there should be a revelation at hand. This should be the end of the world, but maybe the speaker is questioning, but it isn't the end of the world. Like all the events of World War I had just happened, and you would think with the tide of destruction, the blood-dimmed tide, that there would be the second coming. But that didn't happen for him, right? So he's saying, surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. He repeats the second coming, right? Exclamation mark, the second coming. Then he says, hardly are those words out when a vast image out of spiritus mundi, which means spiritus mundi is like, it's like the, what does Emerson call it? The transcendental eyeball, right? The shared consciousness. We're all one, man. It's the shared consciousness that human beings have. This, we could just call it an archetype, right? The archetypal image of, he says, a vast image troubles his sight. So it's like he's remembering something from prehistory. Yes. Notice that it's the spiritus mundi, right? It's the spiritual world somewhere in sands or the desert. So in other words, the speaker here, what he's saying is, he's imagining, he's saying, surely this happened. Surely this happened. Okay. Now I'm remembering something from my consciousness, right? From way back when. And I see sands or the desert. It's almost like he's scrying. Yeah. It's like he's, John Dee and Edward Kelly, and he is scrying into the crystal ball, which Yates, by the way, did do. Crowley talks about that they did this in Golden Dawn rituals. And Yates was a proponent of that. Somewhere in sands or the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man. Well, that makes us think of the Sphinx. Yes. Now, why didn't he just say Sphinx? Because he's seeing an image from the back, from his prehistory, right? From the back of in his mind palace, I guess. But it also means more than just the Sphinx, because the Sphinx is old. Yes, it's ancient, but he's also talking about something now. I'll get to that in a second. He says, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows, reel, R-E-E-L, meaning like almost like a film reel, but also what I imagine here, what I've always imagined in this poem is that he imagines a tank, because the tank has remember the tank at the time was brand new, but the tank now, as we know it, what I imagine here is, he says, a shape with lion body. So it's like, you imagine it's on its haunches, and it's kind of its hands are pulled back. And then the head of a man, well, when they would drive the tank in the desert, oftentimes you picture Rommel or whomever in the tank, sticking their head out of the top of the tank. Also, the top, right, the turret of the tank moves left and right. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun. The gaze, to me, makes me think of the barrel of the tank. It's blank. There's nothing. It's dead-eyed. There's nothing in it, and it's pitiless because it fires, right? It destroys all in its path. Is moving its slow thighs. I imagine the tracks of the tank, right? While all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. Now, obviously, the tank is also, that's a literal image for me, but it's also a symbolic image of, we get the idea of the beast, the great beast, rising in the desert, right? Crowley, Yates's buddy or whatever, did rituals in the desert. Remember the ritual that he did? He went to not the Algerian desert. He went to, I guess it was in the Sahara. He went to Egypt. He took Lola Zaza there, or whomever it was, the Scarlet Woman. And that other dude, what was that guy's name? The guy that he drove crazy. His buddy, not his buddy, but kind of his disciple. They went out into the desert. They drew a ring of fire. They took peyote and, heroin, and did stuff to him while they did a ritual. Later on, Crowley said that he had contacted his Horus. Then he went to the museum in Cairo, and the voice told him go straight to the bust of Horus, wherever it was. He went to it, and the number on it, the serial number was, is 666. And then that's when he wrote the Book of the Law, right? Why do I bring all that up? Because we're talking about a desert image here where things are being conjured, at least in the mind of the speaker here. We're conjuring death images. How could they not be demonic images, right? We're talking about the end of the world. We're talking about death and destruction. What he says, the darkness drops again. So that means both his vision sort of blacks out, but also this to me is like the darkness of chaos, maybe in the mind. This is in the mind of in the words of the speaker here. This is not my worldview. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep. Now, come on. What does that mean? 20 centuries. We're in the 20th century. 20 centuries of stony sleep means 2,000 years. Stony sleep is obviously a reference to the tomb, right? They laid Jesus in the tomb. So he's saying, it seems like a blasphemous image, what he's saying here, right? 20 centuries of stony sleep. Well, Christ didn't sleep for 2,000 years, yes? But he says, stony sleep, were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. A rocking cradle, is that a nativity image, right? We're vexed to nightmare by a rocking. He says, the darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. Do you see what he's saying in this poem? What's he saying? He's talking about the Antichrist. Yes? He's talking about, and what rough beast, right? We're vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. The rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem is Yates's Antichrist. The fact that he ends the poem on a question to me is really disturbing. Why are you ending with this question? Are you questioning that this is happening? Is this a statement? What are you saying? Notice that a couple of things that have recurred throughout the poem. We got the falcon. I hate the Antichrist too. I'm saying it, right? I hate the Antichrist, and I think that the poem. Look, the poem. It's a brilliant poem. The language in the poem is brilliant, right? It's strong. It's relevant. If anything, it's relevant to how people, large masses, groups of people think. Um, we know that people, certain people in the world with power, want destruction. They want to get those numbers down so that they can rebuild it anew. They want to sell themselves to evil in any way they can. They want to sell themselves to Satan or to the Antichrist. They think that they want to bring about destruction so that they can rule over the ensuing chaos. Which is whatever, man. I think that let's get back to he says when he said the falcon and the falconer, a couple of animal images in here. We got the lion. We got the falcon, the lion, the indignant desert birds, right? We got when we talked about the baptismal images or the biblical images, which run throughout the poem, right? We get the blood-dimmed tide, the ceremony of innocence. We get the actual word revelation. We get the second coming, the actual term, and then repeated. Spiritus. We get the, we get the rocking cradle image, the stony sleep image, Bethlehem. He mentions the word Bethlehem by name. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this poem, but I think that overall, this is a pretty complete example of like drinking my dew. I'm drinking my dew here, y'all. I'm drinking my dew, and right after this, I'm going to McDee's. I'm telling you, I'm so hungry. I gotta get that dollar menu. I think that this is a pretty complete example of a Gnostic worldview. The ideas of eternal return, destruction, planned destruction, the eons, a 2,000-year cycle, right? His 2,000-year cycle of birth and destruction. I don't know. What do we call that? What do we call that? We call that I don't know. Not problem, reaction, solution, but what do we call that? Anyway, so I think this is a really dark poem, and I don't want to say it's different than Yeats's other poems because his poems are they're so rich in their symbolism and their language. Of course, we get Sailing to Byzantium around the same time period, right? That is No Country for Old Men. We get the poem. We get the poem Byzantium, right? And then we get Lapis Lazuli and a couple of his other sort of darker poems, but he also writes great love poems, right? But anyway, I just thought I would go over that as an analysis of the current world without really talking about it much in detail, so we can kind of get a break from that, and a discussion of 20th century poetry, war, and Gnosticism. War poetry itself is a specific genre. Obviously the best examples of war poetry are like the Iliad. Do you know why it's called the Iliad, by the way? If you're watching this, you might appreciate this because it's just an interesting thing that it's commonly spoken, but nobody really gets it. The epic poem, the Homeric poem is called the Iliad because we know the Odyssey is called the Odyssey because of Odysseus, but why is the Iliad called the Iliad? Well, because the Iliad is about the Trojan War, right? The Greeks and the Trojans, and we get Agamemnon angry at Priam because Paris has stolen his bride, Helen, right? Interestingly, Yeats talks a lot about Helen, right? He's got a few poems about Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Yes. So it's called the Iliad because it's about the Trojan War, and Troy is the city of Ilium, right? It's Ilium. So it's called the Iliad. Just thought that's interesting. The Aeneid is obviously called the Aeneid because it's about Aeneas. So anyway, yeah, I just thought that would be something interesting to talk about. Oh yeah, war poetry. War poetry is its own sort of specific genre. Maybe we'll do some more examples of war poetry. We could talk about Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. We could talk about some of just Ted Hughes's violent poetry. Or we could start doing some movies. So let's find a good, for the next one, let's find a good light movie to watch, right? Because, there's that big black cloud floating over the world right now, specific parts of the world, but it's over us. I mean, hopefully you're living your life out there and you are, you're LIVIN, you're living. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here. But I certainly, there's a lot going on, and it's hard not to feel the oppression of world events, right? And what would help with that would be some fat PayPals and some fat cash apps, right? So we can get these bills paid and keep the heat on and keep the electricity on and stay in that house, yeah? Because those gas prices are going up, the car's expensive, and we're all just trying to make it, right? I mean, just to be real, I mean, hopefully one day we'll be in this place where we're all rich in spirit, right? And we won't need any of this stuff anymore. But in the meantime, we got some bills to pay. So anyway, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And tonight, please go and see our buddy DPH, David Patrick Harry, who will be talking to Bay's Homeschool Mom on his channel at Church of the Eternal Logos. Also, check out Exposing Powerful Lies live streams, who does streams all the time. And we'll be doing one next week, our brother Jerry here. Also, obviously, check out, as always, Jay's Analysis and Primal Edge Health. And everybody else. Yeah, go to Rachel Wilson, right? Based Homeschool Mom. All right, you guys. Thank you so much to my beautiful mods there, whom I love so much, and I appreciate you because you are the king mods of all time. There is nobody better than you, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you so much. Jethro, OK, Expo, Nateski, Mixki out there, I love you. I appreciate you. ADH, A Devotional Heart, I love you. Thank you to everybody, and I will see you next time. Okay, y'all? Peace. Thank you. Peace.